Hello, friends. It's Katie back with another episode of my vlog. And today I want to talk about reading. Do you guys like to read? Are you the type that maybe got assigned a bunch of books when you were in school and then once you graduated from school, you never read another book again? Apparently, there's a lot of people like that out there. I've never met one that I know of. I've always kind of floated in circles with people who are more of readers, but I definitely recognize that that's not everyone. So I'm always curious as to where other people are with their relationship to books and reading and stories and all of that stuff. I was an avid reader as a child. I was the type of kid who constantly had a book in my hand, constantly was just reading everywhere, constantly had to be told, hey, put that book down, let's go do something else. It was a form of escape. It was a form of adventure into fantastical realms, science fiction realms. I'm a huge science fiction fan. So I just read a ton as a kid and as a teenager. And then when I became a young adult, it seems like I had less and less time for reading, or rather, I prioritized less and less of my time for reading because, of course, we all are given the same 24 hours in a day, and it's all how we wind up using that time, right? Obviously, some people have more, life stressors or, responsibilities and things that we have to do than other people, so that leaves less time for reading. But also, if you love to read, you're going to make time to read because you love to do it. So I'll admit I got caught in the whirlwind of, partying and jobs and adult life and kind of started to taper off on my reading at that point. And then the big one was having kids really put a giant dent in my reading habit. I didn't stop reading at all, but I started reading to my kids instead of reading to myself. When my oldest was born, I actually took the opportunity to read a bunch of really long, very adult books out loud to the baby because, it's just a way to bond, to have this time with, cuddling the baby, but also reading aloud so that the baby can hear the mom's voice saying a story. It doesn't really matter what the story is when the baby is a newborn. So I actually read The Odyssey and Moby Dick out loud to my oldest child as an infant, which is pretty fun to do. I enjoyed it, and it was a cool way to slow myself down while reading those books. Once my kids got a little bit older, though, nobody was going to tolerate epic poetry or, 1,000-page long Melville novels. So I kind of flipped way into the kid reading world and was just, I don't know, I don't want to say stuck there, but very, very firmly rooted there for about 10 years, where kind of all the reading that I was doing was some form of kids' book. And I would read my kids longer, children's chapter books and whatnot, not just picture books, but certainly not Homer at that point. And then my business started taking off and life started getting even more busy than it already was with the small children and everything. And I found myself just reading less and less. And it became kind of this joke between me and Sean. I like to say, yeah, oh, I know how to read, but I don't ever do it. And, I know that obviously the rise of the internet and cell phones and, having everything in your pocket as a giant distraction definitely cut into my reading time in terms of reading books, because I was reading, social media posts and news items and weird clickbait bullshit on the internet instead of sitting down and reading a book. So I recently, and when I say recently, in the last year and a half, decided to recommit to reading. I was like, I don't read enough. I kind of feel bad about it. I wish I had some more of that going on in my life. But as you guys know, the stroke dimension is a busy place. There's a lot of demands on my time. And so again, it's hard for me to make time to sit down with a book and fully read it. I do every once in a while. But what I have found is my kind of miracle cure for being a very busy person and not feeling like I have that much time to dedicate to reading, is I have fallen in love with audiobooks. I've been listening to audiobooks for the last, like I said, about a year and a half. And what I do is I listen to them in the studio while I'm working on stuff. And it's really, really cool to be able to listen to someone else reading me an awesome book while I'm working in the studio. My eyes and my hands are busy with the artwork that I'm working on, but my ears and my brain are totally captivated by whatever the story is. So I've really fallen in love with audiobooks, and I highly recommend checking out audiobooks. If you've never listened to a book before like that, you never know, you might love it. I actually started with LibriVox, which is where you can get all kinds of free readings of books. And then I moved on to just paying for audiobooks because I want to pay for my entertainment. I think that people who spent the time making the audiobook deserve something for that. So I've been listening to them mostly through just kind of the Apple Books interface, but I do go out on the internet and get them from other places as well. And like I said, I love the audiobooks in the studio deal because I can, say, okay, I'm just going to work for one chapter. And because it's an audiobook, it shows me on the app, oh, this chapter is half an hour long, or oh, this chapter is 15 minutes long, or whatever. So it gives me a good sense of how much of my time I'm going to be spending on it. And I kind of use it as a timer for studio tasks also. I rotate through my tasks. I'll work for this much time on sewing, and then I'll move, okay, let me do some dye prep work instead. Okay, let me do some drawing instead. And sometimes I use the end of chapter or the end of, a session of listening to an audiobook as kind of a marker for when it's time to stop working on one project and migrate myself over to another project. So they're really fun in that way too. I actually got in this hilarious argument with Sean about whether listening to an audiobook counts as reading the book. He doesn't think so. I do, obviously. My argument was, if a blind person listens to an audiobook, did they just read that book? And he said, of course they did. And I was like, okay, so if I, as a sighted person, use that tool that a disabled person is using to access that book, aren't I also reading the book if I just listen to it? He didn't like that as much, but I really needled at him for like 3 days about this, and like went out to other people and was like, does this count as reading a book? And everybody agreed with me. So, but I also wanted to talk about what books I've been reading. If you don't believe that listening to an audiobook is reading, again, it totally is. It also is reading in the broader sense of the word reading. I know, often we get very caught up in like the narrow definition of something. Okay, using your eyeballs to read marks, look at marks on a page and translate those into an understanding of what this person has written on the page. Okay, that's a technical definition of reading. But we talk about doing like a close read of a film that you're watching, or even you can do a close read of music that you're listening to. It's more how you're absorbing and interacting with the information and the art that has been placed in front of you. And I don't really care which sense you're using necessarily, if it's your eyeballs or your ears. If you're still getting the story delivered to you and you are using your comprehensive skills, your ability to understand something, whether it's an audio cue or a visual cue, I think it's kind of the same. Again, they're mechanically different, but in terms of understanding the story, in terms of getting the material, I've been reading these books. So what have I been reading? I have been doing a mix of fiction and nonfiction. I've been enjoying actually quite a bit of nonfiction recently. I'm not usually a nonfiction person, but as part of my therapy and yoga and running and trying to just kind of become a better person myself, I sort of dipped into this self-help world of audiobooks again. And I really thoroughly enjoyed Art and Fear by David Bales and Ted Orland, which is a great book about the process of making art, the process of creativity, and how artists operate. It's a lot of cheerleading and saying you can do it if you're scared. I'm not scared of art, but I know some people feel intimidated. But for me, it was really great to just read their take on the creative process and how the whole thing works. I also read The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, which was fantastic. Highly recommend that one to everyone. Artists and non-artists alike, I think, could definitely benefit from reading The Four Agreements. And I also actually didn't do an audiobook on this one. I read What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by Haruki Murakami, who's one of my favorite fiction authors. And I didn't even realize that he's a runner. And I went and got into running and then found out that he's written this whole nonfiction book about running, and about how he talks about running and about what he thinks about while he's running. And that one was really fantastic. If you're a Haruki Murakami fan, you'll probably enjoy it. If you're a runner, you'll probably enjoy it. And boy, if you're like me, a Murakami fan who's also a runner, you will love this book. So I will definitely recommend that one. So that's kind of what I've been doing in nonfiction. Then in the fiction world, did a few classics over the summer. I listened to The Idiot by Dostoevsky, and I listened to The Trial by Kafka. And I started listening to Don Quixote by Cervantes with the kids. They're super into it, but I have to go slower on audiobooks that I listen to with the kids because obviously they have to want to be in the room with me listening to the audiobook with me. So we are about a quarter of the way through Don Quixote right now, and the kids are loving it. So I try to sneak that one in as often as we can. I invite them down into the studio and say, hey, let's do art time and listen to our book together. And they're super into it. So, excuse me, that's been fun. And then classics, but not like classics, hundreds of years old or anything. I actually listened to We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson with them before we started Don Quixote, and that's how I got them hooked on audiobooks. If you have never checked that one out, I will definitely recommend We've Always Lived in the Castle. Incredible story. I don't want to say too much about it because there's a potential to spoiler some stuff here, but two sisters who live in an old decrepit house, and something tragic happened in that house before, and now everyone in the town maybe doesn't hate them, but views them as scary outsiders. And they've been cooped up in this house with their like batty old uncle for years and years and years, just kind of disintegrating into their own madness, if you will. It's fantastic. And like I said, I had the kids listen to that one with me first, which really gripped them and got them into the whole concept of audiobooks. And then we moved on to Don Quixote. But then meanwhile, I moved on after we finished We've Always Lived in the Castle. I wanted to listen to another Shirley Jackson book. So I started up The Haunting of Hill House, which is, of course, what the Netflix I guess it's miniseries. I don't know what they're calling them these days. Anyhow, the Netflix show was based on, kind of loosely based on, I realized as soon as I started listening to the book, it's quite different than the Netflix show. Quite scary. Maybe not scarier than the Netflix show, but in a different way. And I'm really, really enjoying that one. And I'm actually kind of going slower on that one than I normally do just because I want it to kind of last a little bit longer. So yeah, those two Shirley Jackson books have been awesome. And I got to recommend those ones to my mom. My mom is a super avid reader. She's constantly reading. And she had never read either of those Shirley Jackson books. So I got to recommend those to her, which is always fun because my mom's read like everything. So yeah, that's what I've been reading and what I've been enjoying and how my reading life is looking these days. I would love to hear what you guys are reading, and maybe based on what I told you I enjoyed, if you have recommendations, just like with Cinema Club, I would love to get a new book recommendation, a new audiobook recommendation. If you are recommending an audiobook and you have a particular narrator that you want to recommend, I'd love to hear about that too. Of course, you know, people all read books differently, so it's always a different experience when you get a different narrator on a different book. So yeah, let me know what you guys have been reading, any recommendations for me or anything else. I'd love to hear it. And feel free to weigh in as well on is listening to an audiobook reading that book or are you not reading it argument. Of course, if you disagree with me, I'm not really going to listen to you on that one. But I'd love to know how people feel about that and if it's any kind of bone of contention in your house as well. All right, you guys, thanks so much for watching. I will be back in a few more days with another episode of my vlog. Until then, take care and stay safe out there.